Hi, my name is Layla Felder, I'm 17 years old, and I'm an avid art lover. Come join me as I talk with artists and curators about their art, their processes, and what makes them tick, because we are in conversation. Hi, we're at the High Museum right now. I'm here with Michael Rooks. He's a curator and a friend of mine. I've known Michael since we started doing the tours here. So we're at doing Mehretu's exhibition. It's a retrospective, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it's a retrospective, which is like showing all of her work over the years. So yeah, Michael's going to take some pictures.
Absolutely, we have fun. It's a big exhibition. Retrospectives usually are really big, you know, considering they represent the entirety of an artist's career up to that point of the exhibition. So this exhibition began in 1996 and ended in 2019. So pretty broad representation of Julie's work. And it's organized by the Whitney Museum of Art, American Art, and the Los Angeles County Museum. So, and it has 4 venues. Of course, it opened at last week. We're the second venue, and then the next venue is the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis. And then the last venue is the Whitney. Because of COVID, Whitney went from second venue to last, and we are the second venue. So, and the venues are important because for Julie, her work is it's very specific about aligning her own background, her history, her identity, where she's from, is important. And so the different venues are cited in parts of the country that are meaningful to her. For example, the Midwest is where she and her family eventually emigrated from Ethiopia. But first, when they came to Ethiopia, they came to the Southeast, to Alabama. So the Southeast is important. So we're kind of representing that part of the So let's go this way. So you were looking at these earlier. Yeah. What were your thoughts?
I press
preview?
Yeah, press preview. I remember her sort of talking about these, and they were the ones that she'd done like it's, I don't know what the type of paper is, but sort of like a sheer paper, so she'd do something under it, put that over, and then do something over it, and that's how she did that, right?
Yeah, right. So these are the earliest paintings of the show. They're paintings on canvas, but they're made with graphite and also acrylic. Sorry, it's ink, you're right. We should. The idea early on in her, around 96, 95, she was making these little drawings, you write on mylar, and so they're semi-transparent. So that led to paintings that have these different layers of transparency, and the idea of layering sort of began there. Also, with those little drawings, we'll see some later in the show. They began with this system of character mapping. She created these characters that represent different aspects of herself, her identity, her past, where she came from. And so, taking those little maps and then extruding them into a painting became what appears in these early works like geological digs or other kinds of maps, right?
Because they did remind me of maps as well as sort of thinking. Kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's just the gray, but I got kind of UK vibes.
Yeah, no, they look like archaeological digs or maps, right? And in a way that makes sense because what she was doing early on was sort of archaeology of herself and sort of situating herself in the world. Being a mixed race immigrant from Ethiopia who identifies as queer, all these different axes of identity she was trying to figure out and place in the world. So early on. And that evolved, you'll see, into these larger ideas about place and revolution, and eventually evolved into ideas about radical abstraction.
Does she sign her work? Because I don't see a signature.
There might be signatures to that. I don't know. Typically, contemporary artists don't sign on the front of their paintings or their works very infrequently.
Alright, where do you guys
Let's go over here. So, anyway, these early drawings and paintings, which started to introduce ideas about architecture, archaeology, civilization's past, evolved into paintings that were multi-layered with different references to types of architecture and different civilizations, to conflict. You can see in this painting particularly, you've got a lot of references to flames, perhaps even explosions. You'll see these different references to conflict and destruction in little later paintings. But they begin to surface in these. This is a painting from 2001. But also the layers over top, these sort of colorful graphic shapes also start to bring into the idea the history of abstraction in the 20th century, starting with like Kandinsky, for example.
I was about to say, your work reminds me a lot of Kandinsky. Also, is this like an M.C. Escher law here?
I don't know. That's because of the staircase?
Yeah, the staircase is also the fun thing.
Well, probably more like her ideas of layering different details and fragments of architecture. So often they're not, they're in different orientations. They can be upside down, sideways. So that as she starts to layer this information, it no longer has a kind of, or retains a kind of pictorial space, but instead creates a kind of a web or a skein of information that is like a maelstrom of information.
How does she get such clean lines? Because I know this is paint, but it looks like it could be tape.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is. It's masked. So some of these sharp lines, these graphic sharp lines, are often masked with tape, painted. And from a distance, they almost look like they're gestural, right? Because they're these curvilinear forms that you would expect are done, very rapidly in a gestural way. But when you get up closer, you see that they are hard-edged and they're very intentional.
The layers are so cool. I've never seen anyone with layers like that before. And there's always there's more and more and more. Like over here, the wave, the
Hokusai?
yes, hokusai.
Yeah.
It just feels like this is something that you could take hours to look at and still find new things.
Well, that's really perceptive because she was thinking about, early abstraction, and Kandinsky, Russian constructivists as well. But she has this amazing visual acuity that she evolved over the course of her career and her academic career. So you'll see references to, for example, Piranesi, especially at this detail you pointed out here with the stairs, and going up and you think of Piranesi, and then kind of look a couple hundred years to MC Escher, similar idea, as well as Caravaggio. You see in the painting later in the show, references to Caravaggio, great Italian artist.
How heavy is this?
50 pounds, 75 pounds. Hey, I don't know. I didn't lift it. I'm not allowed to lift things. I'm not allowed to touch art. So that's from 2001. This is from 2001 as well. So you see the similar idea. Again, there's even more sort of energy and dynamism in this painting.
It looks like a big bang, honestly.
So things seem to be sort of exploding outward.
There's like a very clear center where things are emanating out of.
And you'll notice too, up through around 2004, she still uses these little characters that she invented. You'll see the sort of, I mentioned character mapping earlier. So these little clusters of forms here, little circles, for example, here, all over the painting, they represent this early exploration of sort of an invention of a language. So anyways, the different little clusters of characters that begin to form and take shape. These early paintings, eventually, they evolve into the more gestural art making that is, I think, an aspect of her mature career that she retained up through 2014. So, and we'll see those in the shows shortly.
How long does a painting like this or a piece like this take to make?
Well, some of her paintings, I don't know how long this took, but some of her paintings took years to make. And there's a process to making paintings, especially the larger paintings. She has a studio with assistants to help with some of the graphic, transferring some of the graphic information, the architectural renderings, for example. All the different layers, of course, take time to dry before you apply another layer of information. You can see how many layers are on this painting. The top layer typically are these flat areas of color, the hard-edged graphic forms we were talking about earlier, as well as up here you see this kind of cloudy, milky fog as well, those kinds of things. The artist puts, or rather applies as the last stage of the painting.
It kind of reminds, some of the shapes kind of remind me of the Jetsons. That's a big Did you sort of see what I mean?
Yeah, like these circular forms.
The shapes, the colors, but not in like a, not like an awkward cartoonish way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe partly because there is a kind of an abnegation of pictorial space, even though there are elements that are referring to architecture and to space, walk upstairs and inhabit rooms, but there is no place to ground oneself, in the picture.
Yeah.
And so instead there is this sort of idea about space that's expansive.
Yeah.
And also futuristic. I think, he's got futurism and the future are important, especially this early work, which is thinking about abstraction and its uses and functions in early 20th century among artists who were thinking about abstraction as a form of radical reimagining, of revolution even. Abstraction because it's not tied to an ideology or to an image or a narrative is endlessly, has endless potentiality. And so it can mean anything. It can mean a new beginning.
I never heard abstraction defined like that. I love that definition.
So this room ends in 2001 for this painting. But if you pick it back up in this gallery with 2001. The first gallery of 96 to 2001, and this gallery begins here, and we actually move clockwise around the room chronologically. So from 2001 all the way around to 2004 with this painting at the stadium. So by 2003, Rusty on my dates. By 2003, those ideas about architecture, representation of fragmented architecture becoming more fragmented. So look at the layers of information of buildings, architectural forms, they're broken apart, fragmented. So that it become almost entirely abstract. Again, put together a few different references to different forms, but for the most part, it becomes this sense of abstraction that almost seems to be imploding in the center of the painting, right? It seems almost to be like falling into the center, or interpreted as kind of coming forth from the center and sort of erupting from the center of the canvas as well.
It's so cool how she's able to still, like, within all of this sort of, like, there's so much happening, and it is a bit chaotic in a way, but then she's still able to make sight lines that, direct your eye to a place.
Yeah, and that has a lot to do with the graphic forms and shapes and lines that are applied in the last stages of the painting. They not only suggest movement, but also they also expand the space of the painting in a way. Because otherwise, the graphic forms are flat. They're rendered in space isometrically, but also the different colors are flat too. So there's a lot of flatness, but at the same time, there's this great depth in the paintings as well. And part of it is these kinds of blue lines in this painting that seem to be pushing out the canvas, sort of stretching it. And Stadia is paintings from the cycle paintings. I would say that there's another cycle of paintings in this room beginning with retrospectives. They're moving around. So the first three paintings in the gallery are from our first cycle of paintings. And this is also from the cycle of paintings. It's one of 4. So around this time, this is 2004, she was thinking about different typologies of architecture, specifically sports typologies, so stadiums, stadia, coliseums, and you can see if you step, it's easy to see if you step back to the lower quarter of the painting, the sort of sweeping interior view of the stadium, the seating, which architecturally, graphically, it suggests order and balance. Classical architecture always is supposed to not only suggest sort of the rule of law and power and logic, but also order and stasis. But what interested her about sports typologies is that inside these buildings that are all about order and what have you, violent things are going on. You're from gladiators all the way to football and rugby and whatever, you know. So yes, at the top you mentioned the flags, different flags of different countries. You can see the Malaysian flag. There's a flag of Israel here.
I think in Russia over there, that's France, the white, red, and blue.
Oh yeah, Russia. Well, which might make sense because this is the symbol for the Moscow Olympics here.
Oh.
So in addition to these references to sort of national pennants and identities, there are these graphic symbols, logos that were appropriated and part of this painting. So the Olympic symbol there, see the Congress symbol here. This is the symbol for Al Jazeera, CBS, I. And yeah, the Olympic rings. So.
It feels like when you look at it, you're also sitting in the stadium, like it feels like you have a seat there as well with the Olympics.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of tricky.
It is. Well, it also that implicates you as the audience in this whole history of our complicity in violence, not specifically sports, but in the violence that is our history for the last several hundreds, thousands of years, right? So you mentioned the characters. You can also see them there in this painting as well. Shapes and forms that she invented as this kind of language in the late 90s. So still using these as clusters to suggest movement or activity, action. Later, it might suggest diasporic movements or movements of information or currency, the kind of energy. They almost represent kind of forms of energy, different kinds of energy.
Do you have a favorite part of this painting or this piece?
I like the lower part because I'm just maybe more attuned to quieter images.
I see that. Yeah, I like the top.
The top is, it's an amazing painting.
Yeah.
And the sort of top register, half of the painting, almost seems to be kind of bearing down on this image below, the space of this Colosseum, almost like a weight that's going to sort of crushes or compresses this space in a way. So that's stadium. You'll notice that color, so that second gallery is pretty colorful. And a lot of those paintings are what Julie became known for early in the 2000s. She was included in the exhibition Freestyle at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 2001, along with a number of other artists, and it was kind of a seminal exhibition. So in that exhibition, forward she came down early on for these really dynamic things, colorful, and so around this time it became more monochromatic. So color started to sort of be very sparingly used in the canvases. This is Black City, this painting here, it's called Black City. This is Seven Acts of Mercy here, and this is the New International.
Why did she call it Seven Acts of Mercy?
Well, that I mentioned, she referred to Caravaggio. This is a painting that she refers to Caravaggio in the title of the painting. So there is a Caravaggio painting titled The Seven Acts of Mercy, but it's not horizontal, it's actually vertical. And it's a dramatic vertical painting, so if you were to turn this painting on its side, that would almost be the kind of dimensions, or rather the orientation, shape of Caravaggio painting.
It looks really cool if you turn to the side.
But also if you look at that Caravaggio, there's another Caravaggio that she's referring to in this painting as well. And I'm forgetting the title of it. So. But there's multiple references to Baroque painting in this work. But for me, because the title is Seven Acts of Mercy and it's such a famous painting of Caravaggio's, I can't help but think about it, especially how it's organized spatially, the painting, Caravaggio. If you take a look at it, the different acts of mercy are all represented in the painting all at once. And what ties them together is this really Baroque drapery. It's kind of billowing out and goes this way and that way throughout the painting, kind of connecting the different acts of mercy. And in a way, the lines that we were talking about earlier that create a kind of movement and push the space of the painting out serve the same function here in how it kind of connects how your eye travels through the painting. And again, like the stadia, you've got this kind of dramatic interior of a stadium, the lower half of the painting that seems almost beset by a kind of tempest of forms. And now, around this time, in the work, that language of symbols and characters, there's still, you can see the sort of lineage of those forms, these little clusters. But the mark making becomes more gestural in that the gesture is this little gesture of the wrist, not like sweeping gestures, but these small clusters of gestural marks, mark making that begin to take the place of this earlier language of characters.
I like the flags up there. I just noticed those. Up in the corner.
Oh yeah, the pennants, exactly.
The open, it almost feels like there's an open sky up at the top, like a dome, open sort of cloud sky. So I think it's reminds me of like a Baroque or Renaissance painting.
Yeah, and you've got the rays, these rays coming from that dome. Here, these lines. You have these paintings that become more monochromatic, quieter, require kind of slow and looking. And they all do because they're so full of information. But the dynamism that color and graphic shapes sort of introduce allow you to kind of just jump in and kind of swim around the thing. But with things like this, you do have to kind of slowly float from one section to the next to start to piece together not only the interior sort of spatial dynamics, but what's going on also outside on top. So these lines, are really interesting. We've seen them kind of repeated in other things throughout the show. This idea of a suggestion of movement or light or have you coming from the top center of the painting now, which is, to me, comes out of the Baroque painting. It may not be at all to Julie, but as a former art historian, that's what I think of. So from sports typologies to different kinds of architecture typologies in Black City, Julie decided to travel to Berlin to do a commission for the Deutsche Guggenheim. And so she started thinking about the kinds of architectural remnants that still exist in Berlin from the war, bunkers, other concrete, sort of brittle concrete shapes and forms that are reminders of World War II and other wars past.
I'm looking like in the first layers especially, like I'm looking at like the lines, and it's a lot more just like boxy and square, whereas the other, there were, things with corners in the other one, but there were also circles and rounded, things that were rounded, but a lot of the lines seemed very rigid. I feel like bullseye.
I don't know what that is. What that refers to, but it is a graphic shape that refers to something specific. Can't tell you what that is. There's also this sort of eagle-like, militaristic, eagle-like form. The stars up in the upper right there in the center might suggest the stars of instead of sports teams, generals, military stars. So this is the same, this is made in 2007. So still see a lot of these sort of graphic shapes that she's incorporating, but they're abstracted to a greater degree than the painting we were looking at earlier.
It has such a big energy when you step back at it, and then when you go there, it almost feels like you go into a world because it's so intricate. I just following the lines. She creates buildings and like little spaces you can just follow and go into. It's amazing. This little area here, I think. There are there's this row of like these cute little corridors, sort of arched hallways. I just want to go in them and see what's there. It reminds me sort of I don't remember the name of the film, but it was about the Beatles and it was animated.
Oh, the Yellow Submarine.
Just in the way that it's kind of, there's a scene with hallways and it's kind of wacky, but again, not like in a bad cartoonish way, but just, creative and sort of like pushing reality and stuff.
Yeah, so this is a small selection of these sort of character indices and maps. And on simple sort of graph-like form. So they don't have any specific meaning. The titles give you some idea about the point of departure for making these different indices. Conflict location in this first painting or drawing to the left. Analysis of character behavior along a timeline here. This one is character migration analysis index here. So it's interesting if you kind of extrude these different plot lines out and axes out into space, they become our architectural space, like you're painting in the first room, where it looks like you're inside of the room. Kind of this very reductive painting early on. To me, it's about sort of taking this idea and make sense and three-dimensional space.
Did you go to art school?
She did. She went to RISD, Rhode Island School of Design.
These two are great.
So she titles them Ink City, these drawings here. So these are from '96. The paintings in the first gallery from '96 too, thinking about sort of ancient cities and archaeological digs. So still thinking in terms of cities and civilizations, past and present. And these two drawings are about ideas about migration, sort of mapping migration. Mentioned that the artist and her family migrated to the U.S. from Ethiopia when she was 7 years old. So to Michigan, to Alabama and then Michigan. So and then later in her life, she's graduated from RISD and settled in New York. Anyway, the idea of migration was important to her in determining, selfhood, determining one's identity, and kind of putting together one's identity and placing oneself in the world.
Were these maps based off of any particular place, or were they just, just being creative?
Not specifically, no. So like the little character indices, these were just ideas about movements. And drawings, these drawings that are rather intimate in scale and size. Well, in size. Again, the scale is massive. So I think that's part of why the size of the painting started to expand, because the scale of the subject in the pictures was massive. And so we started to think about how to interpret that on a larger size work.
In Russia, what's that one called? The synchronous one, all the buildings.
I'm forgetting the name.
Oh, you know what I'm talking about, right, Mama?
What?
The building in Russia with all of the domes.
Oh, the one on the square.
Yeah, I'll find it. But yeah, that's what this reminds me of. But also like medieval castles.
Oh yeah, I totally see it.
You
Yeah.
have like Notre Dame, but also Versailles. Like, wow. Is that? I feel like there's also a shout out to Palazzo in Venice up there.
Yeah,
like Italian.
this is all Venice actually. So the title is Ether, and all the different architectural details are from buildings in Venice. Yeah. The rose windows, which kind of create a pattern, a motif in the painting. You can kind of pick out. And you can see also where domes, so the dome in the center is upside down. So there's different orientation of the information. Any which way. It can be mirrored, that is upside down, or right side out, fragmented. And then there's the lines too, which are fainter now. they're lines, but again, they're not kind of gestural lines, but they're very intentional graphic forms. We're looking at their hard edge.
It feels like in where the other ones, the color would be on like the final layer, these colors are on the first because they look really muted.
Yeah, right. And I don't know if that's, I think that's a combination of the color itself, but also the layering. So if this painting refers to Venice, then the painting across from it is a painting that consists of details of architecture in New York. So. This is titled Invisible Line. That's from 2011. So in a sense, these three paintings together are about three cities: Venice, New York, and Berlin. This is about Berlin. This is called Berliner. The subject of Berliner is refers to architectures that are no longer existing.
When I look at this, it feels like I've never been to Berlin, but I went to Munich when I was in 6th, 7th grade. And when I look at it, it feels like Germany. It feels like Munich. Like it's beautiful, but it also feels a little bit cold, but not in a bad way. I feel sort of like, yeah, the clouds. Because we also went in Christmas when it was chilly a little bit more.
Yeah.
But still beautiful.
I know those geometric shapes that are colorful at the beginning in early paintings, and they're muted in the ether, for example. Now they're all entirely pale, and I like that the artist thinks about them in terms of like ghosts or spirits, as sort of the presence of the past in the painting in a way. Still also formally kind of do the same thing about stretching out the space. Maybe it's sort of evocative of the idea of a past really living in the present. In cities, especially where you go to cities that are ancient, old, and you're a stranger and trying to sort of grasp with all this different history that surrounds you.
Yeah. And everything's built on top of each other, like especially in Venice, like literally centuries built on top of each other.
Exactly. So there's a work referring to the Metropolitan Opera in the show. This is a France in our collection, the Hennessy collection, and it was made as part of an exhibition that was shown at the Metropolitan Opera, the gallery, and it was for, I believe, they were releasing the ring cycle at the time.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So I think this work specifically refers to Das Rheingold. But if the reference is Das Rheingold, how would you interpret the image then?
For me, Wagner. Wagner's operas are not so heavy in content, but I feel like sort of the energy and sort of the music is heavy, not in that it's sad, but it just has weight. And I get weight from this. There's also a lot of movement. It sort of almost looks like wind, like a harsh wind blowing through a field, in a way. And in Das Rheingold, there's a lot of upheaval, especially within the world of the gods. And so I see that the conflict and the turmoil. And yeah, sort of the contrast between like the lights here and the really dark. I don't know, because there's also of course it's an opera, there's like this dark force, there's dark
Right.
energy, but also like just the angle of it, because in the Met production there are these beautiful moving,
The lions, right?
Yeah.
They're sort of floating and going up and down.
yeah, and so just like the angle of the movie reminds me of the set pieces, and then also this use of like circles. And with the ring that they're looking for, or the big line.
Yeah, the ring of the Nibelung.
So the show is called Limitations on the Ring. And I think this is from a series of works from that show, or a cycle, it was the King cycle. But it was the first work by Julie Gerst that we acquired here at the museum in 2010-11. Session of 2010. So we bought it in honor of David Driscoll. Our second exposition actually Mehretu was one of the paintings from the Mogama cycle. And the full title is Mogama Painting in 4 Parts. And we have part number 2. The other 3 paintings are dispersed at the museums around the world. The Tate Modern has one. The Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, and the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. So they came back together again. They were made for Documenta in Kassel, and were inspired by the Egyptian Revolution, which is popularly known as the Facebook Revolution, because it's how the people organized via social media. And that interested Julie, I think, as it was evolving, and as the Arab Spring started to spread. And became a history that's still sort of in the making. It's still an unfinished history, I think, in many ways. So, and for me, that's how I interpret some of these sort of data bits in the paintings, of these little squares and rectangles that look like they're absences, or for me, that I interpret that as like information, bits of information that still have to be filled in. Sort of an unfinished history with the Syrian war going on, for example. So the paintings all, they consist of architectural details, information, sites around the world of social change, revolution, and literally every kind of square around the world where you had sort of social organization and revolution happening, from Zucchetti's part and lower right bar painting here to Vesco Square to Place de la Bastille, Red Square, Tiananmen Square in China. So if you started to sort of deconstruct the different details in this painting, you'd find that it really represents the whole sort of world, 20th century revolution, different places in the world. And what's cool is that, so this is not the end of the artist's interest in architecture and cities, but they're sort of, for me, the sort of apogee. She made a big painting called Cairo after this cycle of paintings and other works. But a few years later, she started to think about, I think, the individual experience of a place and one's individual, coming back to the individual rather than the collective experience of a place or history that these all represent. And so we have these 2 paintings in the same gallery here, and they're called Being Higher, 1 and 2. So these paintings were made with the artist really moving her body. These are 2011. So a couple of years later, dramatic reduction in scale, and also a rethinking of representation, abstraction, and how that merge in the painting through the movement of the body and the scale of the body. I almost think like birds in flight, or even like, I'm from Chicago, so snow angels, think of snow angels. And what's cool that we sort of noticed when we from the exhibition is that if you look at this painting on the right, being hired, I think that's being hired two, that form is re-amplified at the top of our painting. You can see at the top there's this almost figure-like form. You can see it from a distance. And it almost looks as though it prefigured this idea that you get coming back to the individual, to the body, to movement. And for me, coming back again to Baroque painting, I think of great altarpiece paintings, the Transfiguration or the Assumption of the Virgin, or other images of this kind of movement upwards. The center of the top painting being so important. You were talking about that earlier. Things, the details of the top centers of these paintings are really important, and especially in that painting.
So did she put graphite, like did she put paint on herself and just lay down and kind of move around?
Exactly. So it's ink and acrylic like the other earlier paintings, but made all with movement of her body. So these paintings represent where she's at now in her studio, and you'll see that there are no visible references to architecture, to objective imagery, but they start there. They start with an archive. She has an archive of photographs that are like news photographs, things that she's pulled from different sources. Social media, news, what have you. And so they begin with images, photographic images. Like this painting, for example, it's called Conjured Hearts. So it's referring to the protest in Ferguson at the building on the ground. And the photograph, which you can kind of make out here, the light green area, there's like the torso of a figure with his hands up during the protest. So the photographs are just blown out so that they become entirely abstract and become these blurs that suggest sort of atmospheric forms and shapes and color that provide sort of the ground of the paintings. And then at the top is a layer of information that sometimes suggests writing, graffiti perhaps, or different forms of mark making that suggest a different kind of language. The painting here is Tela Hineni. And Hineni is a Hebrew word, a phrase, and I get it right for you. It means here I am. And that's a phrase that Moses heard when he confronted the burning bush. God spoke to him from the burning bush, here I am. It's also the phrase that parents and children, it's common in Hebrew to make sure that calling your children, coming down from playing outside, what have you. But in this case, it's really hot, referring to not only the burning bush, that imagery of prophetic fire in Exodus, but also page 17, so referring to the Northern California wildfires at the time. So she's thinking about environmental destruction and climate change as well, in addition to another kind of form of burning that is the ethnic cleansing campaign against the Rohingya in Myanmar. So she's conflated these two different kinds of conflagration fire in this painting to address different aspects of our reality today.
And this is all spray paint?
It's some paint is sprayed with a compressor or even other forms of spray paint. But also areas of screen printing So the video we have of the exhibition gives you some idea of the process, especially these later things, because they're making them around the time they made the video. So you see different areas being screen printed, different areas being painted in the compressor. It's an incredibly time-consuming process of layering all this information. So same level of complexity and time that goes into layering these that went into layering the other things, making other things. Just a different organization of the information. In this case, it's abstract, totally abstract. And there's references too. This is called haka. You know haka?
Yeah, like the dance, right?
Yeah. You ever see the gingerbread haka, the holiday one? It's a TV commercial for flour in Hawaii. I use Hawaii for haka because the University of Hawaii calls me to the haka all the time in the field. Which is, like a ceremonial dance, war dance. It's a sort of aggressive display of power, and it's supposed to meant to, in sports, they intimidate the other team. Suggesting how an idea or a form or image can be interpreted one way or another, or it can sort of drift in one direction or another. These shapes here, the white shapes, as the kinds of geometric angular tattoos of Maori. Really beautiful tattoos that totally abstract and often these jagged edges, shapes.
So this is the most recent one?
Yeah, so this is the most recent painting of the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to see you.
I haven't
Taking
seen you.
so much time on your busy life.
Thank you for taking the time to do this. This was awesome. I love going through seeing how to do this. Like this is beautiful. I think my favorite one is still the ether one.
Uh-huh.
And this, yeah. Gorgeous.
That's beautiful. Absolutely.
This is Michael Rooks, and we're in the High Museum right now. If you get a chance, please, come and see this. And come check out their other exhibitions. There's a lot of stuff here. Yeah.
And Michael, what's your title again at the museum?
I'm the Wheeling family curator of contemporary modern art.
Yes.
Oh, the contemporary collection is in the Wheeling Pavilion at the top floor, the Skyway level, which is the third floor, right above us.
Okay.
Make your way on, I think.
That's right.